The Prime Minister has declared it's time for governments to step back out of people's lives as he called for an end to vaccine mandates. Jennifer Beshwari is in Canberra. Jen, there's been some criticism today.
Criticism from Labor premiers in particular today, angry over the Prime Minister's comments, calling for governments to get out of people's lives and end vaccine mandates. Victoria's Daniel Andrews says he won't be lectured by the Prime Minister and accused him of siding with violent protesters.
I'm committed to doing what has to be done and not about chasing through doublespeak the votes of extremists or their preferences.
Queensland's Deputy Premier also took a swipe at the PM, accusing him of taking both sides of the argument.
The Prime Minister requires journalists to be vaccinated to attend his press conferences. Why should a barista in Brisbane be less safe at work than the Prime Minister?
Scott Morrison rejected suggestions he sympathises with extremists.
I completely and totally and continue to denunciate any violence, any threat, any intimidation.
Saying he does have sympathy for people who are frustrated with COVID restrictions.
Australians have done their part. It's now time for them to be able to step forward with their lives and for governments to step back out of their lives.
Scott Morrison, who received his third COVID-19 vaccine alongside 86-year-old Jane Marlishiak, the first Aussie to get the jab.
We might give the thumbs up today. What do you think? We'll do the thumbs up today.
Says vaccine mandates to enter businesses like pubs and cafes should not be in place after states reach the 80% vaccination threshold.
And this has to come to an end and governments have to step back. Governments have to start letting go of all of these controls on people's lives.
New South Wales will drop vaccine passports on December 15. Queensland will introduce them to enter hospitality venues from December 17, as will WA once the state reopens. While Victoria has vowed to keep jab restrictions in place well into next year.
Well, I was very clear yesterday in denunciating any violence, threats or intimidation that is applied against anyone. And we have absolutely no truck with that whatsoever. I couldn't have been clearer about denunciating the violence and the threats and the intimidation. They have no place in Australia's public policy debate whatsoever. I have consistently said all the way through that there is a deal with Australians. And that deal with Australians, we said, and particularly as we saw here in New South Wales, Dom, we said, come forward and get vaccinated. Victorians did that. In the ACT, they've done that. And in Queensland and Western Australia, we're increasingly seeing that. And I said, when we get vaccinated, when we hit those marks that have been set by the scientific experts at 80%, that's when Australians expect governments to step back and for them to step forward. And that is my government's view. I'm going to keep the deal with Australians. I've been saying this consistently ever since I put the national plan together and got all of the states and territories to agree to it. And we're going to keep going with that plan. Australians have earned that. They've kept their part of the deal. I assure you that I intend to keep mine.
On that note, why did you express sympathy for the protesters, even when some
Well, as I said, I completely and totally and continue to denunciate any violence, any threat, any intimidation, and any suggestion that I have not done that is completely false. I have been completely clear on that issue. What I'm also very clear about is our national plan. What I'm also very clear about is it's important that governments keep their side of the deal. Australians have kept theirs.
do you have sympathy for those demonstrators?
I don't have sympathy for violence. I don't have sympathy for intimidation or threats whatsoever. And on those issues, then of course not. And as I have encouraged people not to participate in that, including those who would number themselves amongst Liberal Party ranks. I've said absolutely they shouldn't be participating in any violent, and any suggestion that I would is patently absurd. I have sympathy for Australians who've had a gutful of governments telling them what to do over the last 2 years. And I think they have been very clear in keeping their side of the deal. And they've kept their side of the deal in getting vaccinated and enabling us, particularly here in New South Wales and in Victoria, where I absolutely welcome the restoration of the freedoms that have been put there today for Victorians. I think that's fantastic. That's what should be happening. Australians have done their part. It's now time for them to be able to step forward with their lives and for governments to step back out of their lives. That's what Liberals believe. That's what Nationals believe. I know the Labor Party has a different view about that, and they will seek to attack us on these issues. That's fine. That's politics.
Prime Minister, not everyone has done their part, because there are anti-vaxxers who are, for whatever reason, ideological, medical, religious,
Sure.
are not getting vaccinated.
Yeah.
And they're putting gallows in front of the Victorian state.
And that's appalling.
So you have sympathy for their frustration, but not sympathy for their actions. Is that what you're saying?
I think you're making an assumption that the frustration that Australians feel is only limited to a small group of people who have engaged in violence and threats and intimidation and have worked against the vaccination program. I have no sympathy with that agenda, but for the broader view of Australians who have done the right thing and got vaccinated and want to come together again and want their lives back, and they want governments to stop telling them what to do and have governments step back and them step forward into their own future. That's the cause I have sympathy with.
Those Australians also had a gutful of the anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, I am the Prime Minister that actually recommended that we should introduce mandatory vaccines for aged care workers. And I've got to tell you, it took me some months, as you'll recall, for all the state governments to back me in on that and put in those mandatory vaccines for aged care workers. For many months, I was the one who was saying, go out there and get the AstraZeneca vaccine. I wasn't the one talking down the AstraZeneca vaccine. Others were doing that. I was standing up for our vaccination program, and Australia today has one of the highest rates of vaccination anywhere in the world. But we didn't have to do it by bribing people. We didn't have to do it by saying we're going to pay you to do it. And our position on mandatory vaccines extended only to those who are working in the health sector, particularly those working with the most vulnerable of Australians, in aged care, in disability, working in emergency wards. That's where we said the mandatory vaccine should be in place. We said in the rest of the economy, that should be up for businesses to decide. It's their business. They can decide these issues. We don't think government should be telling them who should come in and out of their businesses.
You then having it both ways by acknowledging that people are angry about restrictions when it was the National Cabinet that imposed many of them.
No, I've said very clearly that over the course of the pandemic, that these restrictions have been regrettably necessary. And I was the advocate of those. But we have now got to the point where Australian economy is opening up again because of the hard work of Australians in ensuring that they went forward and did what we asked them to do. And that was to push through the lockdowns. And they were tough, I have no doubt. The Premier may wish to comment on this as well. These were not issues. These were not issues that Liberal governments in particular wanted to rush towards. But they were necessary. But there comes a time where government has to step back. You can't hold on to these things forever. These restrictions in places that still have not reached 80%, they remain necessary. But governments have to say when they're going to step back out of people's lives. When are they going to stop telling them what they can do in their businesses? When are they going to stop telling them, what they can do and where they can go? That was necessary for a time. But time has moved on. The circumstances have changed. Australia now has one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, and Australians have earned, through their own sacrifices, through their own actions, for governments to start stepping back so they can step forward.
Now you can ban states like New South Wales and Victoria still have some restrictions on the unvaccinated, but we have the highest vaccination rate. Do you support students with the unvaccinated at some time?
Well, what I particularly welcome here in New South Wales, and I welcome it also in Victoria, is that they're setting dates for when government steps back. I think that's fair and reasonable. They have to make decisions in accordance with their public health interest. But they've got to be able to, as they have done here in New South Wales, given business, given Australians, the clear signal that this is not something they want to continue doing. And this has to come to an end, and governments have to step back. Governments have to start letting go of all of these controls on people's lives. And I know particularly the Labor Party likes interfering in people's lives. They like putting up people's taxes. They like governments controlling with more regulation. I get all that. That's what they do. That's not what we like to do. And so there's a difference of view on that.
Premier, can I ask you?